there is some Etsy news that, well, this could hurt some Etsy sellers. And what we're talking about here is, are they going to allow selling name brands of some kind? Actually, let's dig into the article here and let's see exactly what this article is saying. And this came in from Auction Bytes, I believe it is. I believe that's the one, right, Chris? Yeah. So they write here, should Etsy open separate area for Stanley Cup resellers? Okay, so let's just read through this and see what this is and what it means. So it says Etsy sellers are debating whether the company should allow resellers of mass-produced goods onto the platform. It currently only allows items that are handmade, vintage, or craft supplies. I'm sure lots of you have heard of the latest craze with the Stanley Starbucks mugs, cups, quenchers. Target's limited edition versions, people camping out in front of Target and then running back Black Friday style to get them. And they must have had some discussion in the seller board there. In turn, resellers are scrambling to cash in, which is fine, but some of them are being sold on Etsy. I have an idea, though, for a new approach Etsy could take. The seller wrote, and it says basically, let them in. The seller explained, my idea would be to create distinct Etsy sub shops, Etsy handmade, Etsy vintage, Etsy craft supplies, and Etsy news shop for things like Stanley, Starbucks, quenchers. Maybe they could call it Etsy discount or Etsy plus. There are plenty of skeptics, such as who wrote, as nice as that would be, there still wouldn't be anything to keep all those bad actors from claiming their garbage is handmade or vintage just to help their sales and still swamping our categories with tripe, because we know Etsy won't stop them. Another seller who disagreed with the concept said continuing to cheapen the site will do nothing to help legitimate handmade and vintage sellers here on Etsy. One seller compared the concept to Amazon, where they also sell their handmade goods. Chris, I'm going to read this here after. What is your thoughts on this? And anyone watching this, let us know. What is your thoughts on letting this happen? Comments, let us know. Chris, what's your thoughts, buddy?
Okay, I'm kind of torn on this one. And let me talk through this. So generally speaking, I think I'm against reselling of stuff on Etsy, right? I like the fact that it is unique products, be it vintage, handmade, or print on demand. But Scott, this article was talking specifically about the Stanley Cup, right? And I'm thinking of limited time events like Stanley Cup, the Super Bowl, right? The Indy 500, right? Something like that, where the merchandise that's created for that specific event would still be a limited run and would still be something that is somewhat collectible, right? So I'm kind of 50-50 on this. I generally fall in the camp of, I don't think reselling of stuff should be allowed. But in this case, there is like the collector value side of this, which is what you would find a lot of times on a place like Etsy anyway. I think it's better off on a place like eBay or potentially on Amazon than on Etsy. I could make the argument either direction, but I think I fall more on the, let's just keep it to unique products and not included the like limited run stuff. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm 100% against it. I don't think they should. I think it would cheapen the site, and I think then it lets in more people that are going to be selling stuff that's let's face it, like Etsy, what made Etsy unique was handmade, right? That's what made them unique. But they realized that they couldn't just survive with handmade. It just wasn't a big enough market, a big enough reach, a big enough for them to turn Etsy into a great platform or a financially like massive one like an Amazon, right? But I think with them opening up for digital products, which they never offered before, right? They now offer on demand. You're allowed to do that. Okay. So I think that they've done enough there to allow you to be able to do that. Now, could you have someone that writes books be able to maybe go on there? That might be an option, right? Maybe an author, because they're writing the book. Maybe that's a thing. But to go ahead and say, I'm going to put Stanley. Now, who's going to sell the Stanley? You have to be a reseller. Who's going to be a reseller? Now you're going to have people that are counterfeits. I think it opens up a lot of people coming in and going to fake it as their Stanleys, as people are already doing right now with other things. So I'm dead against it. I don't see any benefits in that. So that's where Chris and I are a little different on that. But Chris, what do you feel now that I've kind of shared my thoughts? Are you thinking a little different? Or are you good?
Well, and that's why I said I think I'm 50-50 on this, right? I almost always come down on the side of let's not resell anything. And I think the argument that
Yeah.
I'm having in my head right now is there a space where we're saying this is a limited run of something? So like Etsy collectibles, right? Or something like that. And, as I'm talking through it, I think I like it less and less because I think the truly collectible stuff in a lot of cases is going to fall under the vintage category, right? Nobody cares right now about a 2023 Super Bowl shirt, but in 15 years they might, right? And nobody cares about a 2024 Stanley Cup shirt right now or 2024 Stanley Cup crown or, whatever it is, but they might in 15 years. So I think a lot of this stuff you already can resell Stanley Cup stuff on Etsy as long as it would fall under the vintage category. Am I missing something there?
No, I mean, as long as you're number one, a reseller, and you have the rights to sell Stanley stuff, right? Yes, you could, but you're not able to just go on there and just buy it at bulk, and then there's nothing that you did to create that Stanley Cup. Right. There's zero that you've done. Now, if you were doing print on demand and Stanley gave our print on demand partner the license to Stanley, and we put, I don't know, a bass fish thing for a bass fisherman for the Stanley Cup, that's different because now you're putting the design on it and then they have rights to it. But then still you would be like, well, Stanley, who has the rights, the reseller, that would be hard to really trace and track and all that stuff. So I think
on
it
the resale
does
side, it
fall on
would
the
fall
line
under
like
first
a
sale
drop
doctrine.
shipping. Say that
Right.
again.
On the reseller side, right, you fall under the first sale doctrine, which is the same reason you can resell anything that you own on like eBay, right?
Sure.
So the Stanley Cup technically loses their rights to it once they've sold it, and you are then able to resell something you own, at least within the US, right? And so I think the more that I talk through this, if we're talking about purely just reselling, and the use case that I'm thinking of here, Scott, is Bob Joe's t-shirts, makes a bunch of Stanley Cup t-shirts for 2024. They don't sell enough of them, or somebody goes and buys 50 of them and wants to turn around and list it on Etsy. That to me should be off limits, period. Right? Like that's just silly. And somebody in the comments on the live just said, hey, that's just e-commerce, right? They're just selling Stanley Cup stuff online. And if that's the case, I do disagree with it. I think there is something to be said on the collectible or on the vintage side, like reselling stuff there. But again, I think if it meets the requirements of Etsy's vintage anyway, then it's the right place for it. If not, then if you want to just go find a random t-shirt, you can get it on Amazon or you can already get it on eBay. I don't really see a benefit to Etsy by allowing something like this. It seems like it would just create more of a mess. And since I generally feel like we shouldn't be doing any reselling on Etsy anyway, I think that's where I fall on this. I think as I talk through this, I feel like I'm more and more on your side. Not that I was ever like, yeah, let's just resell a Stanley Cup. I can make the argument on the other side. I just don't like that argument. And if anybody wants to steel man that argument for me in the comments, please do that, because I'm curious what your thoughts are. Now, Scott, the other piece of this article that I wanted to talk about is less about the topic itself and more about the suggestion that happens about halfway down the article, where they're talking about the way that they could do this. And it said something about like Etsy Plus, right? Etsy Craft Supplies, Etsy Vintage, Etsy Handmade. And their suggestion is basically create different sections of the site that would treat all of these things differently. What are your thoughts on that? That is a little bit of the approach that Amazon took at first when they started allowing Amazon merch, and they've kind of gone away from that. So do you see any benefit to Etsy splitting up into Etsy Print on Demand and Etsy Handmade and Etsy Vintage in terms of like when you're searching, they say, hey, do you want the search results for one of these three? Or is it better to have those as kind of a mix of potential results and then use the other data to say, hey, this person's a vintage buyer, let's show them more of the vintage stuff? What are your thoughts on that part of that discussion?
I think that could work, but technically print on demand, the way that we're doing it is we are hand making the design, right? Like we're creating the design. So I don't know. I mean, yes, you could probably do like handmade where it has to be like every thread has to be done or sewn or whatever. Again, I think as a shopper, do you care if it's something that you're looking for, right? But to me, Etsy's not the place that I'm going to go and look for a tripod for my camera, right? I'm not going to, unless I'm trying to look for a retro tripod lamp, right? Like if I'm looking for something like that, that's unique, that's different, that might have been handmade, like a coffee table or something like that, then possibly. So no, I don't know. I don't think they need to do that. I just think that they have to be strict on what they're allowing, even with the print on demand stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. Guys, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the comments. What's your thoughts? Do you think yes, they should allow this or no?